My name is Ronan and I'm Head of Marketing at Zurich Life, and absolutely delighted to be asked by Nick and Cleena to be your MC and host for this morning's event. In fairness to this event, it really is a good lineup of speakers later on this morning. So congratulations to Nick and to the whole team at Alpha for pulling this together. This morning session, there's two parts to this morning session, and I'm going to start at the second half. That's around the topic of auto enrolment. For those of you who aren't 100% sure, auto enrolment is a clever name for pensions. So when we talk about housekeeping, I'd just like to say that the doors are now locked. Will not be opened again until 11 o'clock. Because you are now being subverted and brought into a discussion around pensions. That is my industry joke done. So that's sense of humour out of the way. But in relation to auto-enrolment, it really is an important discussion. We are going to talk about it with a panel of experts in the second half of this morning's session. Auto-enrolment is going to be introduced in Ireland on the 1st of January 2026. That's 6 months away. And for everyone here in the audience who is an employer, who manages a business, who works in HR, you are all going to be affected because every employer in this country will be affected in some way by the introduction of auto-enrolment. So it'll be a really interesting discussion, and delighted to have my colleague Richie O'Neill. He's going to do an overview of what auto-enrolment is. And then we're going to be joined by a panellist from David from Alpha, Carrie McDermott, solicitor from MDM, and Mairead O'Driscoll, who is a tax expert and also goes by the name The Tax Nerd on Twitter. She's got 26,000 followers on Instagram, so do have a look at her Instagram feed. So that's a discussion on pensions and auto-enrolment, and that will be the second half of this morning's session. But the first part of the session is around motivation and high performance, and these are the aspects of what really matters to leaders within business. So delighted to be joined by two experts that. We've got Pat Lucey, who is an entrepreneur. Pat set up the company Aspira, grew it from himself and his colleague of 2 people to 280 people here in Cork, and then very successfully sold the business. Pat is now on the board of the PMI, and he is on various boards. So delighted to have him on talking about leadership. But before that, delighted to introduce you to Bernard Jackman. Bernard is, many of you will know, is an ex-rugby international. He's a podcaster, he's a pundit, he's a columnist, he's a public speaker, he's a high-performance coach. But what he is really also is a great storyteller. So Bernard is going to try and condense what would normally be an hour-long presentation into, he said 25 minutes, but really 20 minutes. But he's going to try and condense that in, and then he'll join myself and Pat for a brief discussion afterwards. So I'll hand you over to Bernard.
Thanks. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Jack of all trades, it sounds like that, master of none. But it's actually nice to be speaking to a group who are sober. Well, I hope you're sober at 9:30. I'll tell you why I said that, because about 2 weeks ago, a fellow called Stephen Ferris, who played for Ulster, is a good friend of mine, he rang me on a Tuesday and he said, look, I'm double booked on Friday night. Can you go up and do a gig for me up in OMA, Academicals? So I said, okay. So I got the club to ring me anyway. So they told me to be there at 8 o'clock. They asked me if they want a hotel room. I said, no, I'll come back. Because usually those club dinners are usually quite boring, kind of staunch affairs. And it's normally a lot of speeches. And usually the guest speakers, the last to speak, normally you speak at 10:30, be gone by 11. So I said I'd drive up. So I arrived into OMA Academicals anyway at 8 o'clock. And there wasn't a table set. It was like a stag party, right? It was absolutely hopping. And my first time doing one up in the north. So anyway, eventually set tables about 10 o'clock. And I was chatting to the organizer anyway. I said, who do you normally get to speak at these events? He said, an Ulster player or whatever. Right? So I said, okay. And I said, he said, you're the last Southern Catholic in 21 years. Okay, so Jesus. I said, who was the last one? I said, the late and great Moss Keane. Okay, in actual fact, he spoke 22 years ago and 21 years ago. So that'd be very unusual. You'd very rarely go back to the same club for 10 years. So I said, there's a story here. So I said, how did Mossy get on? He said, it was quite late when he got on stage the first year, and he had maybe had a couple of Guinness too many. And anyway, he told a story, and he lost his train of thought, and he sat down and fell asleep. Okay, so I said, okay, the standard isn't too high here. So I said, what happened then? He said, we couldn't wake him up. We brought him back to the hotel, the Silver Birch Hotel, and the deal was to meet him next morning at 8 o'clock for breakfast and give him a few quid expenses, right? So the 3 lads who had the envelope met in a Shell station just up the road from the hotel at about 7:45, and they were like, one fella said this fella will be gone back to Dublin in embarrassment. The other fella said he'd still be asleep. And the third fella said, we better go in and check, right? So they went in anyway. There was Mossy horsing into the full Ulster breakfast. So they left the envelope with the expenses in the middle of the table, and they sat down. They talked about everything else except the night before. And eventually Mossy said, how did I go last night? And they said, oh, you went well, yeah. What stories did I tell? And I said, oh, you told a story about smoking in the tunnel in Twickenham. And what story did I tell after that? And I said, actually, Mossy, you sat down and fell asleep, right? So he got up anyway, and he grabbed the envelope, put it in his pocket. He goes, Jesus, I'm fierce embarrassed. He says, I tell you what, I'll come back next year and do it for half price, okay? So they were there. Oh, we'll have to have a committee meeting. So they had a committee meeting on the Tuesday anyway, and it was 60-40, they voted for Moss to come back, and they advertised it as the return of Moss Keane, okay? And they sold 4 more tables, and they got Mossy up quite early the next night, whatever. So I said to him, how did he handle the obvious embarrassment of the year before? And he said, not a bother. He got up on stage, and his first line was, as I was saying, okay? Which, I think, no disrespect to Cork people, but only a Carrie man could get out of trouble that way. So why am I getting the chance to talk to you for 16 or 17 minutes? So I've had lots of different experience in my life, but I'm passionate about high performance. I'm not an expert in it, but I'm passionate about it. And I suppose in 2010, when I retired from professional rugby, I went back to college in UCD and I did a master's. And my thesis was on the correlation between high-performing behaviours and elite sport and business teams. But I'm not very academic. So the idea of me spending 3 months in the library finding academic documents to back up a thesis wasn't really floating my boat. So I went travelling the world. So I went to Toyota in Japan, I went to the All Blacks, I went to the Sydney Swans, there's a Kerry man, Ty Kennedy was there at the time, I went to Carlton, Sotanto Halpine was there, I went to Melbourne Storm, I went to Google in San Francisco, Amazon in Seattle, I went to the IMG Tennis Academy in Florida, I went to Just Eat, we're just a startup in London, 2 guys and a girl had this idea they could change how we consume takeaways. If you remember, in the old days, some of you are too young, but you basically chose what takeaway you ordered based on what leaflet came in your door, you know? And they had to basically create the app, plus convince restaurants and takeaways that it was worthwhile competing with the Chinese or the Indian or the Italian restaurant that normally you had an advantage over because they were 2 blocks away. So they obviously had a great success, and Just Eat has been an unbelievable success. I'd like to believe I had a role in their success, unfortunately as a customer, right? Rather than actually any leadership power. I went to Man United under Ferguson. I went to Rolex in Switzerland, and now every year I go somewhere. Okay, every year I go somewhere. So I went to Red Bull 2.5 years ago, and ironically now I'm working with Williams Formula One around leadership and cohesion. So yeah, I visited a lot of people, leaders, and a lot of teams that are successful, and I suppose I only have a short snapshot, but I'm going to tell you 3 stories if I can. So I'm a United fan, right, and I don't have much to shout about at the moment. But in 2011, when I was doing my research, I got 4 days in Man United with Alex Ferguson. Okay, and Roy Keane actually was good enough to organise it for me. So if you get access to Man United under Ferguson, he was very strict about who got in, and only he could let you in. Okay, so he only ever a maximum of 2 people, and he held the right to cancel any time. So this was in the diary for 3 or 4 months. But when I got the booking, he said to me, if we lose the week before, if I'm not happy with a group, I'll cancel it. And that's tough shit, whatever. He was very upfront, very straight about what it meant. So I flew in on Tuesday morning. I had Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then I had a match against Everton on Saturday. And if you got access to United, you got half an hour with Ferguson, one-on-one. That was part of the deal. So I'd been part of an Ireland team and that won a Six Nations in 2009, a Leinster team that won a European Cup. And we had come back that summer and promised each other that we were going to be as hungry and as driven as we had been 12 months ago, but we weren't. We were just a little bit off. And I couldn't believe how this man and this club had every year come back, despite the success they had, and kept delivering, right? They were unbelievably driven. So I had access to all areas. So at training, if you didn't know what they'd won, they would have said they'd won nothing. Okay, like how they spoke to each other in meetings probably wouldn't be safe in a HR environment, but people took it as actually good feedback to make the team better. They didn't see it as a personal attack on them. So they had a lot of trust and respect for each other. So they knew if someone is telling them that's not acceptable, it wasn't because they don't like him, it was because they want to win on Saturday. So I had a meeting with Ferguson at 2 o'clock on the Friday for half an hour. And I'd seen him every day and we'd have small chit chat, but he knew that I had a meeting with him. So anyway, I said to him, how do you motivate these people who have everything, right? They have millions in the bank, they play for their country 100 times, they probably won every medal they ever dreamed about. And he said, do you remember the team meeting we had on Wednesday? And I said, yeah. He said, how many chairs were there for players? And I said, I don't know. He said, there's 22. He said, every Monday morning with our staff, we pick 2 11s, okay? Well, if you got more than that, some players go to reserves. If you got less than that, we bring players from the academy, we bring players back from a loan. I like to start the week with 22 players, 2 11s, okay? And they compete all week until an hour and a half before kickoff. I pick my 11 and my 6 or 7 subs and the people who aren't going to play. And constantly I'm watching. I'm watching their behaviours, I'm watching their standards, I'm watching their desire, okay? And I pick the team who've competed the best all week, or the players who've competed the best all week. So competition is a big thing for me, okay? He said there's 5 chairs on the side for coaches. There's the chair for the guy who runs the video, and 2 chairs down the back where you were sitting for visitors. And he said the first day of pre-season every day for the last 22 years. So Alex Ferguson managed United for 25 years, the most long-standing manager in English football. He said every day, at the first day of pre-season for the last 22 years, I've told him this story. Okay, so Alex Ferguson grew up in a tough part of Glasgow, a place called Govan. If you grew up in Govan, there's a strong chance you'd work in the shipbuilding industry because that's what people from Govan did. So Glasgow, like Belfast, were big shipbuilding hubs back then. His father was actually a docker. And he tells a story that he's about 14 years of age and he's having dinner with his mum and dad. And his father said, Alex, I was coming home from work today and I walked past the building site. And there was 3 men building a wall and I went in. And I asked the first man, what do you do? And he said, I'm a bricklayer. I asked the second man, what do you do? And he said, I earn £6 a month. I asked the third man, what do you do? He said, I'm building a building that 50 years' time, my son or daughter would bring my grandson or granddaughter and say, your grandfather built that. So he said, in this dressing room or meeting room, there's 22 professional soccer players like the bricklayers. Some of you earn 10,000 a week, like the bricklayer earns £6 a month. They're making 300,000 a week now. Okay, but back then, 10,000 a week was a good salary. Some of you will come back to Old Trafford in 50 years' time, or your sons or daughters will come back to Old Trafford in 50 years' time with your people, and there will be a mural outside of you or your team. Or as they walk the corridors, there'll be photographs of the success you've had. Or at halftime, they'll play a montage on the big screens of your success. And your people will get that warm feeling, that pride we have when somebody belonged to us has done something special. And he said he was very lucky. There was a group in that dressing room that first year who actually bought into that, right? And then what he did was he hired or fired. Okay, so he said he wasn't technical, he wasn't tactical. He basically always recruited on character. His scouts would give him players who have talent, and then he would interview them and ask coaches who've worked with him before, players who've worked before, have they got this desire to actually create something really special? Now, it's hard to exit people in the corporate world, okay? And obviously the ideal scenario is you get people on board with your vision, okay? But sometimes you have to make a hard call and actually just get the right people on the bus as well, okay? Because that's what's going to decide whether you're successful or not. So Ferguson was brilliant at setting that vision. And actually, I spoke to Keane about it afterwards, and he said, did he tell you that fucking story about the bricklayer, right? Because, well, so he told it every year for 22 years, but then he found other stories during the year to reinforce it. So if you remember the Chilean coal miners, okay, there was a story about Chilean coal miners, and he spoke about that around teamwork, about resilience. And next thing, they were playing Arsenal one day, and they went into the dressing room, and there was 2 of them. He'd flown over the Chilean 2 coal miners to reinforce the story. So storytelling and getting people to understand what was important was big to him. In your group, in your team, you got to actually understand each other. Okay, what's important to them? Okay, what do they want to build? What do they want to create? Why do they do it? Okay, and then after a while together, and you keep feeding that, you'd eventually have a group who are unbelievably connected and are willing to do something special for each other. That's the hard part, and that's your job as leaders, is to constantly find a way to get the group together, to give the group energy, and to empower them to create something special. And again, to sell that to them about why it's important. Because I know it's important to you, but why is it important to people that you rely on? Okay, the last story I'll tell is I went to the IMG Tennis Academy in Florida. And the IMG Tennis Academy in Florida is where 72 or 3% of the top women in the world top 100 women in the world have been formed or gone through the academy. I think it was 76% of the men. So it's a elite tennis facility. Now, in fairness, some of their talent ID, they go to Eastern Europe and find the best 10-year-olds and bring them to Florida, right? So it's not the perfect development pathway. It's talent ID plus development. But it's owned by IMG, who are a big marketing company. And typical Americans, everything is big and bigger, right? So they kept building and building and building. So suddenly, they didn't have enough tennis players to use all the facilities. So they started to rent out some of the space to corporate teams, military teams, professional sports teams to come and do 4 or 5 day physical training camps, mental camps, relaxation breaks, etc. But one of the things they do is a little test around focus, okay? And focus is a high part of high performance and being able not to be distracted. So it's kind of like, imagine we were all one group, right? And we're here for a day's high performance session. And I said, look, our mission as a group is to go down the stairs, out the door, cross over the bridge, down by the footpath there, kilometre down the road, near the pub, there's a white fence, okay? Touch the white fence, come back. That's our mission for today, right? So our mission for today is touch the white fence. Do we all agree? And most people say it's only 2 kilometres. There's no time limit on it, but that's our mission. And you'd all get up and go out. Just before you get to go out, they say, just hang on a second, actually. About 500 metres down, there's a bit of wooded area and there's a bit of a woodland creek, because it's Florida. At this stage, time of the year, wild boar come in to get a drink, okay? And they've been known to bite people. Just be careful of the wild boar, right? So they've got cameras all the way along the route, and the first 600 metres, everybody is tipping along, happy, focused on the white fence. And then suddenly they hear the wild boar, okay? And they shit themselves and come back, all right, okay? But the military teams, the Marines, the Air Force, the Navy SEALs, when they hear that wild boar, they crouch down, they look into the woods, and they see it's a tape recorder. And they go and touch the white fence, okay? So whenever you're trying to build, right, there's some things that are genuine distractions that you need to deal with, but there's a lot of things that are probably wild boar that if you allow it fester in your group, it can become an excuse, it can become a distraction. And the really good teams, that are really good leaders, say, that's not really relevant to what we're trying to build here. And we can't lose time on that. And just to back up on that, I did a session with Visa, and Visa sponsor Red Bull, and Visa were doing a big kind of key leadership group meeting with the CEOs from all over Europe coming together to London, and decided to ring Red Bull and see if they could use their factory in Milton Keynes for their day's session. So Red Bull got about 4 or 5 million off them a year. So Red Bull said, yeah, you can use it. So they started off at 9 o'clock in the morning. They got an hour and a half tour of the facility, and it was pristine. You can imagine a Formula One factory. Okay, all the trophies, all the memorabilia, all the history, etc. And the lads were saying and the girls were saying, Jesus, imagine what the conference facility is going to be like if this is how good the garage is. The garage wasn't a speck of dirt. But when they got to the end of the tour, they were led to a room which is out the back, and no natural light, okay, no audio visual. It was like an old school canteen room, right? And this is your room for the day. And the CEO of the UK says, I'll sort this out, this is bullshit. We give them 4 million a year. So he goes to find somebody. And the person, he says, well, look, we're not a conference business. Our job is to make the car go fast. So you're lucky to be here today. Okay? If you want a nice conference room, go to the Hilton or go to the River Lee. Okay? But let us do our job. We've already given you an hour and a half. Okay? And again, okay, Red Bull are having a crap season at the moment, but it's that understanding of what you're about. Okay? Not trying to be, well, I am a jack of all trades. Okay? Trying to actually focus on what you're really good at. The last thing I'll just finish on because I think of my time. Yeah. So sledging in rugby is an unfortunate part of the game. I don't know if you saw the weekend. Henry Pollock, the Northampton player, got himself in trouble for slagging off. But I'm probably one of the few people in rugby who was sledged by my own teammates. Okay, so I was playing against Munster in a match in Croke Park in 2009, semi-final. It was the biggest game I ever played, and 80,000 people. It was do or die for Leinster. If we didn't win that game, we were done. And Munster were an unbelievable team. I had won it in 2008, we won it in 2006. And we were massive underdogs. But anyway, we were very nervous in the dressing room before. And I remember Shane Horgan saying, look at lads, let's go out and enjoy it. There's 80,000 people here who've worked all week to buy tickets to support us. Let's just give it our best. The next thing, Nigel Owens is the referee, knocks on the door. Leinster out, right? And normally when referees or touch judges knock on the door, no one answers the first time, right? It's one more squeeze or whatever. Try and let them go out first. But we wanted to just get out there, right? So we're like cattle getting out of the shed in the spring, right? So we ran out. And obviously O'Connell, when Nigel Owens banged on his door, O'Connell wanted to get out as well. So suddenly we were both in the tunnel together. And we were running out onto the pitch from the tunnel. And next thing, the Sky director puts his hand up. And he says, no, you're too early, okay? Right? So he blocked us, right? So we're stood in the tunnel. I always used to go out third. And next thing, it felt like about 3 or 4 minutes, probably about 30 seconds, right? But the cameras get the two teams in the tunnel, and Croke Park goes crazy. 80,000 people up on their feet cheering for their team. And the few hairs I had on my head stood up, whatever, right? And so I used to get loads of nervous energy, right? So I just wanted to say something, whatever, right? So the fella in front of me is a fella called Shane Jennings, and he's a psycho, right? So I couldn't talk to him. So, and And I couldn't talk to the Munster fella who was Jerry Flannery. So I turned around and a guy called Rocky Elsom was behind me, right? So Rocky Elsom was an Australian, brilliant player. And I just said, "Geez, Rocky, there's some fucking crowd here or whatever." And he goes, "They're not here to see you, mate." Okay, right? And he's 100% right, and you're not here to see me either. So I wish you the best of luck with whatever you're trying to build, and thanks for listening to me. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Bernard, and we'll give you a break there. You probably noticed that Bernard mentioned a number of sports. What did he talk about? He talked about soccer, obviously rugby. There was tennis in there. He missed hurling.
Well,
Pat?
I think it's great that Bernard came to Cork, because I can arrange for you to meet with probably the best management team in sport globally. And now that you're in Cork, you're only an hour away from Limerick. So you can go to meet John Kiley and his team. Should I leave now?
Yeah. The first thing Pat said to me, we were emailing over the last couple of weeks, and he just said, first thing he said, "Ronan, if you don't mention Limerick hurling, then I'm walking off stage." So fair play to him. For those of you who don't know, Pat is, as I said in the introduction, he's an entrepreneur. He set up a company called Aspira, grew from 2 people to 280 people. He's on the board of the PMI. And he's a wealth of experience, both from the corporate world with Motorola and as an entrepreneur himself. You've obviously got leadership qualities. You don't grow businesses like that. Your leadership qualities, though, you say started very young, and they came from your family. Will you just give us a flavour?
That's right, and it was interesting to hear, the Bernard stories, the link to family and the generational aspect. So I grew up in a family business in Patrickswell, County Limerick, home of hurling, and neither of my parents had a secondary school education. They both had to leave. It was tough times in Ireland. They had to emigrate in the 50s when they were teenagers, get jobs in England where they met, worked hard, saved up their money, came back to Ireland and bought a shop and then grew it. So I was serving petrol outside from the age of 4. My mother was worried I'd get petrol would spill into my eyes, which is why I looked like this. So I didn't know the word entrepreneur, but I learned at the kitchen table what it took to run a business successfully. And that was work ethic. Like my folks, our shop was open 364 days a year. And my dad was never happy unless somebody came on Christmas Day looking for batteries or cigarettes, so he could open the shop and feel he had done something. So I got to see at firsthand the work ethic that's required to build any business. And the second thing was customer focus. Like you did whatever it took to look after your customers, and you tried to make your customers feel the way you want to be treated when you're engaging with another company. And the last thing was innovation, looking for new things. We had the first cone machine in Munster. So people used to come from miles around to get a cone. It was the bane of my life, because on, not today, but on hot days, that cone machine could only manage about 4 or 5 cones before the ice cream would melt. So I never had the skills to look after that properly. But those things carried with me. So when we set up our own business in 2007, like the need for work ethic, the need to be a servant leader, right? To not just get up and make a great speech, but to show that you're willing to do whatever it takes and you're willing to do what you ask your team to do was really important. The focus on customers was really important, and looking after people. And the last thing I'd say is, again, Bernard talked about being able to challenge each other. I never wanted to surround myself by people who would just nod and agree. I wanted people who would tell me that my baby was ugly. Well, when you have a new baby and you think this is the most beautiful baby in the world, and everybody comes to see and they say, "Oh, that's a beautiful baby." On their way home, they're going, "Oh my God, that was an ugly child," So I learned, especially in Ireland, when I went to people saying, "I have this idea for a business or a product, what do you think?" People would say, "Oh, that's a great idea, Pat, well done." And on their way home, they go, "Oh my God, that was a crazy idea." So I actually use those words. I say, "Please tell me if you think my baby is ugly here," because you need to make it safe for people to give that feedback. And thank God people got the hang of it, and then there was a deluge of constructive criticism.
Yeah, well,
I think really important.
I think when you talk about children, I think the one time it's okay to say your baby is gorgeous is when you have a baby, and not to worry about it. Bernard, I bring you in because I don't know if people have watched the podcasts that Alpha do, and Bernard was on a podcast, and you were talking about that sort of what makes a high performance person, and one of the criteria was that honest feedback. You've told stories, but tell us, what makes somebody a high performance person?
I think first of all, high performance is hard, and high performers are generally fairly consistent, but they're not perfect. So they often have bad days, they have bad moments, they have bad calls, they have bad meetings, but they're generally quite good at actually understanding why that wasn't as good as it needed to be and taking the learnings or whatever from it and actually being better next time. So they're actually quite good at reviewing themselves or have people around them who review them. So I totally agree with Pat. It's very hard to get people who actually will give you that honest feedback. And part of my trip, I forgot to say, it was with Dyson. So James Dyson likes rugby, thank God, and he sponsors BAT, and he allowed me in for a week with him. And I don't know if you know his story, but basically his father was a classics teacher in a posh school in England. He died in active service when James was 12. And because he died in active service, suddenly him and his brother got a scholarship to the school. But because they weren't from money, and probably because his dad was a teacher, he got bullied horrendously. So he had a really difficult time in school. So he kind of threw all his weight into his studies, got a scholarship to an engineering university, worked for a marine industry, and designed a craft to take boats out of water, which he got a patent for. But he had this idea that he could make a better Hoover than Sanusi or Hoover. And he said it to his wife, and his wife said, well, go for it, go speak to the management. And he did, and they said, no, James, we make craft and machines for the marine industry, stay in your lane. So anyway, he took a settlement and went about trying to design the Hoover that most of us know now. And after 6 months, he was working in his back garden shed. After 6 months, I think they remortgaged the house. After 9 months, I think his wife got a second job. I think after 13 months, his parents remortgaged the house. And eventually, after 17 months, he cracked it. He got the first prototype. But it was the 2,156th attempt before he got it right. And I said to him, how did you keep going? And the reason he's so wealthy now, he's worth 20 billion. It's not just because he's created things, but he's effectively stayed private. He hasn't. And I said, why didn't you go get a bank loan? Why didn't you share the risk when you were obviously going through all these things? He said, I believed I could do it. And as long as I didn't double back on myself and only change one part of the process each time, every time I failed, I was getting one step closer. But so then obviously now he's got a big team. But the senior leadership people with him, they often get headhunted by other companies because you're buying that IP. If you get someone who's worked for James Dyson for 10 years, they've been in quite a good environment for creativity, for processes, etc. But the vast majority of people stay with him. And one of the reasons they stay with him is because he actually welcomes that critical feedback. He begs for it. And they enjoy that opportunity to be part of something where they're actually actively given that feedback. And I suppose going back to the high performance thing, I think performance is, if you want the simplest way I've ever seen performance measured is it's your capabilities multiplied by your behaviors. Okay, so if you're a very experienced coder, okay, you probably have a decent level of capabilities in coding. Okay, and then if you match that with a high work ethic, okay, being able to continue to learn, being able to take feedback on board, generally you should be performing. Okay. Likewise, if you're an apprentice mechanic, your capabilities mightn't be that high. Okay, but if your behaviors are good, your capabilities will grow. And as a leader, then I think it's a case of understanding. Well, this is my team. If it's a sports team, it's 30 odd people. If it's a sales team, it could be 6 people. Well, what are each of their capabilities? Where are their gaps? Where are their weak spots? What are their strengths? More importantly, okay, do they know their strengths? Are we putting them in an area where they can actually deliver those strengths over and over again? And then what are we doing to just improve their blind spots? Okay, and then what's the behaviors like? What's our culture like? What's our standards like? What's our level of commitment like? And you're just trying to drive those all the time. You're trying to drive your capabilities forward and try to drive your behaviors forward. If you get both of those right, you'll get performance. If you're consistent in that, you get high performance. But the problem is with a lot of people is they have a bad day or a bad week and they give up. They give up everything, rather than understanding that unfortunately, even the best have bad days. The best are good at actually dealing with setbacks and carrying on.
And really true, those points. And Pat, when you were talking about the ugly baby, you had people giving you advice, like this is the right thing to do. So yourself and I think a colleague, Cullum, you set up the business. You grew relatively quickly, but at the same time, you grew from the genesis of an idea and then you grew quite large. Like, how do you manage it so that you're the leadership team? How do you, a bit like what Bernard said, extend your goals and your desires across the entire wider team over the course of the 17 or 18 years you were running the business?
So the first thing I'd say is you can't scale from chaos. So if you have a small team and it's chaotic, well, then that is not scalable. So you need to get the fundamentals right day one. And Bernard talked about focus. I used to use this idea of my big strategy triangle because I'm terrible. I can't say no to a good idea. So if one of our engineers comes to me with a good idea, God, yeah, that's great, let's do it. But I had to learn that we first of all define our overall strategy or direction, what we're trying to achieve. So if somebody comes with a good idea, but it's an idea that's pointing off in this direction, I could say, great idea, I'd love to do it, except it doesn't align with what we're trying to achieve as a company. So getting everybody on the same page and knowing that. Sometimes you can tweak the ideas so they work, but it gives me a reason that I can say no. So once you've got everybody on the same page, then it becomes much easier to scale. Like our first sub office was in Dublin, right? So that was actually the most difficult. Going from one location to two was the hardest. After that, we opened in different countries in Europe and in the Middle East, and it was a lot easier. But we made sure we had the technology systems, everything in the cloud, so we could do it, and we had the processes that would work. I think for me personally, the hardest thing was like some of the people who were with me at the early stages of the journey, and I use the surfing analogy, they were well able to surf the smaller waves. But as we got bigger and international, bigger waves were hitting us. And some of those people weren't able to stay afloat. And I, in my attempt to be loyal, I was keeping the people there. But it wasn't helping them by making them deal with waves they couldn't handle. So over time, I had to find a way to let them focus on the smaller waves and find people who could deal with the bigger waves as well. And I felt bad about that because I was thinking, oh, I'm demoting people who were there from the start. But as a bigger picture, I guess the sporting analogy is there again, right? You have to make sure that people are able to play the positions that you're asking them to do. That's a crucial part of scaling as well. You know, find people who are smarter than yourself, put them in a position where they can succeed, and then get out of their way.
Yeah, and Bernard, you use sporting analogies a lot, and you talked about Alex Ferguson and the 22 players. There's probably 500 people working for Manchester United. Yeah. Like, very often when we talk about high performance, we talk about it from a sales environment or a sports environment. How do you extend that across whole parts of the organisation? Like, I work for Zurich, we have 1,000 people. Yeah, we've probably got 50 people out in sales, but we've got loads of people in finance and marketing and HR. Like, we want them to have a high performance culture. Is it possible to extend it?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's how you treat people and making sure everybody understands their role is important. And it was interesting about Ferguson. Obviously, like he's famous for the hairdryer. You know, so a team play badly. After the match, he gives them the hairdryer treatment, which is like an outburst of rage or whatever, right? But also he was very, very caring on the other side of it. And apparently the biggest bollocking or the biggest lecture he ever gave the team was for this incident. So there was a lady, Catty, and she was the receptionist. She passed away earlier this year. And her job was obviously, apart from just being receptionist, was every morning she was given footballs or jerseys, and the players were supposed to sign them as they went past or as they went out in the afternoon for local charities and for hospitals and all that stuff. And Roy Keane was going by one day and he sensed she was a bit upset, and he said, "Caddy, what's wrong?" And he said, "Oh, the players are kind of dodging me and they're telling me they'll do it later, but then they go out the back door, and it's just harder to get players to sign the jersey," which you wouldn't think is a big thing, right? It's not a big thing to sign them. So Roy said, "Grant." He went to Ferguson and he said, "That woman down there, who's an important part of our organisation, is upset because us, like our group, are taking the effing piss whenever they're not signing." And apparently they had a meeting that afternoon for 2.5 hours. Ferguson told him about how lucky they were to be professional footballers, how lucky they were to have the environment they had, to wear that crest, and the responsibility to be decent people. And it's like, apparently from there she realised how actually the players obviously changed their behaviours towards her, but she realised that Ferguson had her back, you know, and that can actually help someone be a high performer. You know, you don't have to be doing incredibly difficult things to be a high performer. You just have to do your role well,
Yeah.
consistently, and sometimes around that, it's just clarity around. So clarity gives confidence. So if you know exactly what your role is, what's expected of you, it's much easier to be a high performer because you know what you're being judged on. And sometimes, again, as leaders, I would say is that we only tell our employees, our team, maybe once a year or once a quarter what we're really looking for, and that there can be a little bit of a vagueness in the whole clarity around what you'll be measured on.
Yeah, okay, really interesting. We're running out of time, but Pat, I just want to ask you, and it's probably very relevant to everyone in the audience. Work before March 2020 and post March 2020 is very different. Like, it felt like pre-COVID, it was leaders were in control. Post-COVID, we've now moved into a world where we talk about financial wellness and employee care and employee benefits, and it's really good as an employee. I'm delighted for it. But how do you marry that when you've got desires for the business and we've got a new working environment? Is it something that we've cracked as yet, or is it still very much a work in progress?
So if anybody has hacked it here in the audience, figured it out, please come and tell me. So I have to admit, pre-COVID, when any of my project management team would come to me and ask if they could work from home or work partly from home, my answer was always no. In my eyes, a project manager had to be there on site with the team, kicking ass, patting backs, whatever it took. And then COVID came and I discovered I was completely wrong. That project managers were well able to manage projects remotely from home. But thankfully, it meant we stayed in business and we actually managed to continue to grow through COVID. So I'm sure many of you have been through a similar thing, depending on your particular industry. You can keep working from home. And then COVID ended, and then I, along with all my colleagues, had gotten used to wearing my pajamas at work, maybe with the bottom half anyway, and not having the commute, and life was just easier working remotely. But as you were talking, Bernard, I was thinking, could you get that high-performing sports team if they all communicated with each other through Teams all week and only met once a week when they were on the pitch? I don't think so. And the worry for me as a business owner is, how do I build and maintain the culture and the shared experience and the learning if everybody is working remotely all the time? I don't think you can. I know people rather hear we can all work great from home, but I think you need a mix. You need to have people coming in. And there's no point saying to people, come in whenever you want, because then some people are in a Monday by themselves, some people are in a Friday by themselves. So you need to actually put work in to manage it so that you encourage people in to collaborate with each other. You don't want them coming in and locking themselves away in a cubicle or a desk for the day. They might as well be at home. So I think it's more difficult now to get good collaboration and look after people's desires to have a balanced lifestyle. But it is possible. I think we're making strides to get there. But again, if anybody, open invitation, if anybody thinks they've sussed this, I'll be delighted to chat to you and learn from other experience. The last thing is, I've seen big differences in location. So we had an office in Amsterdam. People were perfectly happy to come back into the office because they have a great transport system. Okay. And being that I'm from Limerick, living in Cork, I won't talk about the transport infrastructure we have between Cork and Limerick, right? So that's one of our problems. If we could get the transport right, it would make things so much easier to get in and get out.
Yeah, absolutely, 100% agree with you. Living in Dublin, it's the same. Transport is just as bad. We're out of time. And I think we've already given Nick and Cliona the next topic for their next leadership session. But to Bernard and to Pat, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you. I started with the Mosquine story. I'll just finish with one. So I did the Vinters Federation AGM 2 weeks ago in the Strand Hotel, and the CEO told me that Moss had done it regularly, right? So Mossy used to have he had 8 key cards, for his speeches to help him stay on track. So, but apparently he spoke at the Vinters one 3 times over the course of, say, a decade. But he'd always get quite nervous before he went up on stage, and he used to go to the fella Pat. He'd say, "Did I speak at this before?" And Pat said, "Yeah, you were here 3 years ago." "Oh, Jesus!" And he starts shuffling the cards, which is the same story, just in a different order, or whatever.
Just to let you know, the doors are still locked. So now we are into the pensions conversation. So unfortunately, my colleague Richie O'Neill is going to have to follow Bernard, which is going to be challenging on that. But he's going to speak to us for about the next 10, 15 minutes on the topic of auto enrolment, what it means, and then we'll have a panel discussion. There'll be time for Q&A at the end if we have time. So if you've got any questions, you may be able to pose them. But Richie, over to yourself.
Thanks a million, Ronan. And I'm sorry to disappoint. I have the job of making pensions exciting for the next 10 minutes after some brilliant insights. I was just thinking they're delighted to be down in Cork this week. 20 years ago, I graduated out of UCC, so delighted to be back down in Cork again, and we had some good times on Washington Street when we were down there. Auto enrolment, look, I'm going to cover it and give a brief overview, and we do have legal and tax experts come up for the panel afterwards, and hopefully people have heard plenty about this. It's going to come online on the 1st of January 2026, so as Ronan said, 6-7 months away, and we do need to get prepared. But so the big question lots of people might ask is, why? Why are we introducing this and why now? And I suppose Ireland has a reputation statistically from a European context. We're very wealthy. We do very well as a country economically. But what we're very poor at is making preservation for our retirement. 41% of the people in Ireland are going to rely on a state pension when they get into retirement. So 41% of people, that will be their main source of income when they get there. And you might think that's fine. Anyone know the current state pension when you're 66? 278. So you get 278 if you go to the post office every week when you're over 66. Not a bad, it works out about 14,500 a year. Not a bad system. But I often use this analogy at home. It just suits our home circumstances. I have Dad, thankfully still alive in his 80s. He's benefited from that for a number of years. He had 5 kids. And we say this to him on the weekend, you have a great life, Dad. You go down to the post office and get your 278. You had 5 kids working this week, paid their PRSI. So it's not a funded scheme, the state pension in Ireland. It's funded week by week. So we paid our PRSI this week, the 5 of us, and that's what it takes to get you your 278 when you do the figures. When I retire, I have 2 kids. When I retire, we'll only have 2 people paying PRSI in the country to pay my state pension, if it stays at the current rate. So either my kids are going to have to pay 2.5 times the social welfare to get me my 278, or my pension is going to be halved. Very unpopular decisions politically, both sides. So we have 5 people paying that PRSI every week to fund my dad's pension, the 5 kids. I have only 2 little lads. So I'm going to struggle to get the same state pension when I get there. So that's the way I look at it. So the government have to introduce, and that's when you hear this pensions time bomb, or Ireland's demographics are changing. We simply won't have the number of people working paying PRSI to fund all of us when we get over 66. And that's why we have to do something. So again, the rules around it. There's an estimated 800,000 workers who have no private pension provision. And you will be auto-enrolled next January if you earn over 20,000, you're aged between 23 and 60, and you're not already in a pension scheme. And again, this is a catch-all scenario. It includes employees' probation, casual, seasonal, part-time contracts. It's voluntary to opt in for people if you're outside that. So if you are still working at 62, you can decide, I want to opt in and be included in auto-enrollment. If you're less than 23, you can also opt in. And those excluded down the bottom, self-employed, they've tried to get self-employed people involved in other jurisdictions, hasn't worked. If you're not earning, it doesn't apply to you. And if you're a member of a private pension scheme, and that's the big one that we would say to people is, if you're already a member of a private pension scheme where there's money coming out of your salary on a monthly basis, you're completely excluded. So that won't apply to auto-enrolment. So again, these eligible employees will be identified through revenue data. Are you in those age brackets? Are you earning more than 20,000? A payroll notification will be sent through payroll. So this is all going to be written by a payroll software. All of you as employers, they will be able to feed into your own payroll system, identify those people who are earning over 20,000 and fall into the categories, and if they'll identify also if they're not paying a monthly contribution to a pension scheme already. And if those are all identified, it will start deducting 1.5% of their gross pay, matched by the employer 1.5%, and the government will top it up then as well. It's based on your gross pay, collected from the employer and the employee, and then those contributions will be invested on behalf of the employee. They only announced last week the investment managers they've appointed to invest that money on all members' behalves. Big question we get an awful lot, can people opt out? When you go in, you have to stay in for 6 months. And on months 7 and 8, people can decide I want to opt out and not be included in the scheme anymore. The employee gets a refund of their contributions, but importantly, the employer or the state do not. So you will keep a small pot there if they do get out. They'll keep the government contribution and the employer. So the employer will not get a refund of contributions. If you opt out, there's also an opt-out after a scheme contribution change. I said to you, they start at 1.5% and 1.5%. After 3 years, that will go to 3% employer, 3% employee, 4.5% and 4.5% after another 3 years, and end up at 6% and 6%. So the aim here is to get the 6 employee, 6 employer, and 2% of government top-up That'll mean in the future they plan to have 14% of everyone's pay being going into auto enrolment. It'll take a long time to get to those levels. It is important to stay. If someone does decide they don't want to be in it and they want to get out or suspend, they'll be automatically picked up every 2 years. And they'll be put back in for another 6 months. And they can decide to opt out again. So theoretically, you could have someone who'll be in this for 6 months, opt out. Be re-enrolled after 2 years for 6 months, opt out. Re-enrolled after another 2 years and 6. So potentially you could have loads of little small pots added for your 6 months. As I said, there's 800,000 employees affected. And this is an important factor that we'll touch back on later. We reckon that 200,000 of those are higher rate taxpayers, which means they're paying tax at 40%. It's very important for those members that they don't end up in auto enrolment. It makes no financial sense whatsoever. They should have private pension provision because they get tax relief at a higher rate. So very important that those 200,000. And then we have lower rate taxpayers in the bracket of 20% or don't pay tax at all. And there's a bigger discussion to be had there whether auto enrolment suits those employees or not. So again, the 40% taxpayers are at a significant disadvantage, and many 20% taxpayers may also favour a prevention. So the big question is, as an employer, as HR, as an employee, where do I end up? My future fund, which is the new name for Auto Enrolment Pension Plan, or a traditional employer-sponsored pension scheme, Master Trust or PRSA. And again, if I compare the two of them side by side, a traditional workplace pensions, the incentive here is tax relief. And again, we'll cover off that in a little bit more detail. You get tax relief at either 40 or 20%. You have flexible retirement ages. Once you leave employment, you can get your pension pot anytime between 50 and 75, which is very important when I come to the other side. You have flexible contribution rates. So let's say you're very conscientious about your retirement, say 1.5% won't give me a huge pension. I want to put in 3 or 4%. Auto enrolment cannot facilitate it. It's rigid government structure that can only facilitate the exact ones. Very importantly, a financial advisor is linked to a traditional pension. So again, the questions that you need to talk to Alpha Wealth about, what system should I be in, what suits our employees best, that isn't linked to the government-run scheme. There is no financial advice, no help, no support around investment funds, risk, tax rates. There's none involved in the auto enrolment. And again, you get a broad investment choice that if you want to invest in certain areas, you can. It'll be much more limited under auto enrolment. The government scheme, it's an employee incentive of a state contribution, not tax relief, which is important. The access can only be got at state pension age, which again is crucial. That is very rigid. So again, I'll use myself an example. I'm in an employment, I get to age 63, physically my body starts to give up on me. I have to stop working. In auto enrolment, I cannot draw my pension. I have to wait till I start getting my state pension at 66. Whereas in a private pension arrangement, I can access it any time from 50 onwards if I've left that employment. So it's an important one. You can put in additional contributions, as I said, no financial advice, and a narrow investment choice. So there's lots of benefits, as I said, on a traditional workplace pension that, again, you need advice on your individual circumstances to talk to a financial advisor. The tax relief, this is an interesting one that they changed. So the traditional pension scheme in Ireland is tax relief, but the government went in this route in a state top-up, as the way they're phrasing it. Anyone remember SSIAs? Launched in 2001, saved €254 a month, and the government would top it up. That was a brilliant success in Ireland. Huge amount of people took it out. All the money washed out in 2006-07, the Celtic Tiger and those saunas bought to bait the band. The government thought that was a success, so they said people don't understand tax relief. So what they've done for auto enrolment is they said they will top it up on a 1-for-3 basis. So they didn't go the tax relief route. So the traditional route is you get tax relief to your marginal rate, whether 20 or 40, and that will continue to be available for the traditional workplace. The state top-up, easy to communicate. It's at one rate for everyone who goes into auto employment, but it doesn't apply to the private pension. And just if we go to comparing it, it equates approximately, or does equate the tax relief of 25% that government top-up, which, as I said earlier, is significantly less than the 40% tax relief for a higher rate taxpayer. That's why we said those 200,000 people, it makes very little sense for them to enter auto enrolment, getting 25% top-up when there is 40% relief available. And just to put this into figures, and I'll use the 3 of them across, hopefully you can see that. To get €100 into your pension on the bottom line, a higher rate taxpayer, it actually costs them 60, and the government give a 40% tax relief to make the 100. In the middle is the auto enrolment. To have €100 into your auto enrolment pension, the state top-up is 25 and it would cost you 75. And a standard rate taxpayer on the far right, to have €100 in your pension, you pay 80 and your tax relief is 20. So you can see the best stairs on the left-hand side, a higher rate taxpayer going into a traditional pension to have €100 in your pension, its effective cost to you is 60. Auto enrolment in the middle, obviously less than a 40% tax relief, but slightly better than a 20% taxpayer. And they're the decisions that are going to be very important that you need to sit down, have conversations, and get advice around. Communication is key. We're only 7 months away, and this is going to be one of the biggest things to hit Irish society in a number of years. Every employer, every employee will have money taken out of their salary and put into a pension plan. The communication, I suppose, wave hasn't started yet. When they launched this in the UK, that guy on the right-hand side, little furry animal, is called Worky. And there was ads in every newspaper, every radio station, everything was just worky, worky, worky for the year up to it to say everyone needs a workplace pension. That was the message. They spent 8.5 million sterling a year on Worky to advertise auto enrolment. We haven't got that in Ireland yet. So for the second half of this year, we expect, and the government need, to get a serious communication message out there. So as employers, as HR consultants, you're going to start getting lots of questions. Because everywhere this will be plastered about, you're going to be auto-enrolled in a pension scheme come January. People are going to come to you with questions. What does this mean for me? Are we going into it? Am I not going into it? Do we have a private pension? And these are the questions that are going to be flooding at employers for the next 6 months. Anyone fancying to change a job? Public Jobs advertised the CEO of NERSA at the weekend there, actually I saw coming up on my feed. So they're looking for a CEO. So that's how new this whole government department is, and they need to get their marketing message out there. But they're currently looking for a CEO. So for employers, preparation is crucially important. It feels 6-7 months. This is going to come on top of us extremely quickly. 4 points. You will need to register an employer portal is required. So they're going to launch a portal where every employer will need to want to register. That will facilitate the payroll feed into your own payroll software. The government will launch that and notify us in time. Income from multiple employments is considered for auto enrolment. The Department of Social Protection only clarified this recently. It's very interesting. Let's say you do have a part-time worker and they're on 15,000 and you think that's fine, they won't be applied for auto enrolment, they're under the 20,000 limit. If that employee is working somewhere else, and you may know or may not know about it, and they're earning 10,000, that brings it to 25, they'll come into auto enrolment for you and the others, they'll come in for both. So you might not expect that person to have 1.5% deducted out of their salary and you'd have to match it because you think they're on 15,000. If they're earning 10,000 somewhere else, it will come out of your system as well. So it's just to know these nuances and rules of what to expect for employees. Payroll software updates will be needed. They are in consultation with all the payroll providers. We have regular meetings with the payroll providers to see what stage they're at. And staff must be informed of AA membership. I don't think that'll be an issue because the advertising and the awareness of this will grow significantly. Potential challenges, and this is I think where really the conversations and the advice become really important. So voluntary. Most pension schemes that are out there are called voluntary. So you would take on an employee and the employee comes in and says, we have a pension scheme in place, you can join. After 6 months, it's up to you. That's typical, the type of structures we see out there. Now, if you leave those people and they haven't joined your pension scheme, they'll all be picked up in auto enrolment. So lots of employers are asking, should I make the pension scheme mandatory if I don't want to be dealing with auto enrolment? Do you have to change that employment to say every new employee to go on, we have a pension scheme, it's mandatory, and you join from day one? Because I'll say after about probationary periods, if you say you have a 6-month probationary period to join the pension scheme, they go into auto enrolment straight away. So you could have a person in auto enrolment for the first 6 months, then they join your pension scheme and they have 2 pots that are running side by side. So there's a lot of conversations with employers about, am I trying to work with auto enrolment? Am I trying to keep it out? Am I going to work dual systems? And as a HR department, how do we work with the 2 systems? So getting your head around these types of, I suppose, scenarios are very important. Vesting period, and again, to be a little bit technical, vesting periods are when the employee becomes entitled to the employer contribution to a pension. Statutory is 2 years. So that means if a person leaves your employment within 2 years and they leave, they look for refund of contributions, you get your contributions back. There's no, I suppose, security in the auto enrolment scheme. Once you give the money in, it's gone to that employee, it's gone. With private pension schemes, you can build in vesting periods whereby if that employee moves on within the first 2 years, takes a refund of contributions, you get your ones back as well. Standard and exemptions, look, the government's aim here is to get this off the ground. What they've said in 6 years' time, they're going to have an IT system built that if you run a dual system, your private pension in work and auto enrolment, this IT will be able to tell you which pot it wins, basically which one is better off for the employee. So if I'm a 20% taxpayer and I'm going into my work scheme versus auto enrollment at 25, it will tell me which one I'm better in. But that's a long way down the road. 6 years' time in 2032, they will bring them in the best posts. And again, this is the question, hybrid or integration? Will you run two pension schemes? Will you run a private one? Will you just have auto enrolment? And the decisions and the conversations are really needed. And I would say get yourselves up to speed by talking to the team in Alpha Wealth about what we need to have in place for January. Because if you currently have probation periods of 6 months, that if someone joins, you join the pension scheme 6 months' time, people who join next month will start causing an issue next January because they will go into auto enrolment even though you may intend them to go into your own pension scheme. At now, eligibility, if you have a current pension scheme, check your eligibility periods. Keep the same or alter with the pension provider you have it with. That's where people join immediately or within 6 months. Higher rate taxpayers, we really need to find the best home for them and try and avoid that auto enrolment. New joiners, do you potentially have a new category where I said if a new joiner joins your company, it's now mandatory to go into the pension scheme if you take a job here and here's the contribution rates you join from day one. Lots of employers are considering that. And education. Educate non-members of existing schemes. If you do have an existing scheme and you have lots of members through inertia never joined it, you have an issue there because we can't force people who are not in the pension scheme into it now. You can't mandate it. So it's education to those to say, here's the benefit of one pension scheme versus the other. And that's again where an advisor can come in to show you the education and the benefits of one versus the others. And finally, why should an employee join the existing? More generous tax relief for the hire. You can put in variable contribution rates and greater product flexibility, particularly around when you can access. And that's really what pensions are about, being able to get at a pot of money to provide you with an income when you need it, not necessarily when the government say you should have it. When you need it, it'll be the important thing. So look, lots of technical data in that, and I wanted to just give a high-level overview of it. It is a positive thing this is coming in. It's really needed in Ireland. We need to get more people not relying on the state pension because in its current format, it can't remain. It's just not sustainable. So that's the aim to get this done. But overall, from an employer's and employee's point of view, there's plenty of new data, plenty of learnings to be taken over the next 6 months. So please do reach out to the team in Alpha. Ronan?
We might move the table of chairs out for people. So I'm going to invite our fellow panelists up.
They can stick one. You can't answer all the questions there. Even it handy.
Well, I'm going to stick with you, Richie, first because you went through an enormous amount of information there. Just remind me of the criteria again. So there was a 20,000 figure in there.
20,000 income and between 23 and 60. So look, I suppose the idea is most people entering the workforce now, are in their early 20s, so it picks you up from that age of 23. If most people started a pension early in life, they would have a brilliant pension pot. Like we've ran figures in the past, Ronan, where you started at 23 or 24 and you put €100 a month away, €200 a month, which isn't huge with tax relief. Over 40 years, that grows to be a massive pension pot. So we always give that message with pensions. The earlier you start, small and little will grow. So the idea is get people in earlier as soon as they join the workforce on a modest income of 20,000 and they're the criteria. So between 23 and 60 and over 20,000 and obviously not in a private pension scheme.
Yeah.
And they'll automatically go into auto enrolment.
And I think it's one of the really interesting things is when we look at all the pension schemes that we manage at Zurich, and we manage thousands of them. And when we look at the company size, there might be 100 employees working in the company. We might only have 30 or 40 people in the pension scheme. So those companies, even though they think we have a pension scheme in place, if you've got 40 or 50 employees who aren't already in the pension scheme, they're going to be automatically enrolled.
Yeah.
So you're looking at...
You'll have a dual system, so the HR person will be there. We're sending an EFT to the life insurance company for the 30 people in the pension, and then we have the other 50 not in it, where there's payroll, nurse payroll is coming into our system, deducting 1.5% from those, taking 1.5% employer contribution. That's on one system, and I'm also dealing with my life company on my private pension system as well. So lots of employers will be dealing with a dual system, without a doubt. As you said, particularly if you have unenrolled employees who haven't joined your own pension scheme.
And you talked about things like people opting out and people taking suspensions, which I suppose gets them out of it for a little while, but they are then automatically enrolled again.
Yeah. It's a typical thing like inertia. If you ask people to join, they often don't act. So we're forcing people in and then giving them the option 6 months down the line. to come out. But again, if they come out once because maybe they're not in a situation at that time of their life, could be at a stage where they're getting married or kids or whatever it is, it will re-enroll them every 2 years then. So they'll be drawn back into it, but they'll have the option again on month 7 and 8 every time to get back out again. But I suppose you want to avoid those situations, because if someone's in for 6 months, it will be a very meagre pension pot. They go out for 2 years, they come back in for 6 months, they go back out again, as I said. You're trying to avoid and get people continually in that mindset of saving little and often for their pension.
Yeah. But I think it's fair to say, regardless of how much preparation people do, and even if they get multiple people into their existing pension scheme, there's always going to be the awkward person who doesn't want to join. So they are going to end up...
They will end up in Auto Enrolment. There is no out here. Everyone is going to end up next January. You will either be in a pension scheme or you'll be in Auto Enrolment. There's no, I don't want to go into that. You will be in it for the first 6 months. So there's no out. So that's why we say every employee is affected. Absolutely every single person who works and gets a PAYE income is affected by this change.
I'll give you a bit of a break now, Richie. I'm going to talk to Mairead. Mairead is a tax expert, but she's here to talk about pensions and tax. So the doors are doubly locked now. Mairead, Richie was showing a slide there around tax relief on pensions. And us in the industry, we talk about tax relief as being the best thing about pensions. Can you just explain the difference between higher rate taxpayers and lower rate taxpayers, and why, from an auto enrolment world, being a higher rate taxpayer, you're better off in a traditional pension scheme?
Yeah, so three-letter word ending in X is the most exciting tax topic, but unfortunately it's really, really important, and I'd say we all know that we pay quite a lot of it, and it depends on how much you earn in the year, what rate you're paying tax at. So there's 2 income tax rates in Ireland, and that's regardless whether it's me, you, the Taoiseach. So that's the 20% rate and the 40% rate, and how you decide which rate you're paying tax in depends on how much you earn in the year. So in the tax year from January to December, if you earn 44,000 or less, you're in the lower rate of tax and you pay tax at 20%. If you earn over 44,000 in the tax year, anything over that 44,000 is taxed at the higher rate of tax, which is 40%. And the rate of tax you pay is also known as the marginal rate. So we hear all these things interchangeably, I think, and it gets confusing. You might hear the lower rate or the standard rate, and then you hear about the higher rate and the marginal rate. So it sounds like there's loads of rates, but there's only 2, the 20% and the 40% rate. So if you're paying a higher rate of tax, so anything you earn over 44,000 is taxed at 40%, that's income tax. That's rate tax you pay. If you contribute to a pension, the government likes us to put money in our pension, so to encourage us, they're giving us tax relief. And depending on what tax rate you're paying at, that's the amount of tax relief you'll get. So if you are earning over 44,000, you're paying tax of 40%, you will get a 40% tax relief on anything you put into your pension. If that's with a private pension. If you go the auto enrolment route, as they were showing us there, they don't give you any tax relief, but they put money, the state, the government puts money into your pot for you. And that's kind of the way you get tax relief. And the amount they give is 1/3, I think. So it works out like 25%. So in that example, if you earn over 44,000 and you have €1,000 of your income, that's gross income before it's taxed. You can put that into your private pension. You'll get 40% tax relief, so you'll get €400 tax saving. If you are in the auto enrolment, you'll only get 25% of a tax saving. So that's kind of how the difference.
And it is complex, but I would say anyone here who's a higher rate taxpayer not paying into a pension, sort that out. But if you're managing a group of people and they're in their pension scheme and you know they're higher rate taxpayer, the one piece of advice you give them is join the pension scheme, because you will immediately benefit from better tax relief.
Yeah, and sorry, there's limits obviously on pension relief. So you can't be like, oh my God, I'll put my whole salary in and I won't pay any tax. This is fantastic. Unfortunately, there's limits on what you can put in, and it depends on your age. So from 15% to 40% of your earnings you can put in to get the tax relief, but there's also a cap at 115,000 in the year, and that's actually lower with the auto enrolment. I understand that's capped at 80,000. Right. So again, there's a disadvantage there depending obviously on your own personal circumstances, but again, all arrows point to a private pension.
Yeah.
And
it's funny, when we first heard talk of auto enrolment, we were like, oh God, should we be going out talking about private pension, and should we allow the government just to do with this? the government are agnostic. The government don't care what people do. They would actually prefer people to go into the private regime because all they're encouraging is they realise, like what Richie said at the very start, they need to get people into pensions. There's too much inertia. People are just not doing it. We were laughing last night because David was talking about a webinar he ran. And how many people did you have in the webinar?
I think there was about one.
One.
We've come a long way, thankfully.
Yeah, and there was another one where you did it in a workplace, but you were literally on a screen in a canteen.
Yeah, so literally people eating their lunch, and I was up in some screen probably with the volume down low.
Because engagement levels with regard to pensions and with regard to tax are low. And people need to be forced to do things. But again, that's part and parcel of what we have to do. Carrie, I'm going to come to yourself now for the hard-nosed legal perspective. Richie was talking about probationary periods and changing contracts and all of that. These are the sort of the things that people aren't prepared for. What's from your perspective?
So the nuances are that if you have somebody with a 6-month probationary period within their contract, which would be standard in most industries, they unfortunately, whether they're for you or not, they're entitled to be auto-enrolled from the minute they start. Lots of questions, which you and I had earlier, slight disagreements on. One is, if somebody isn't for you after 2 or 3 months, or they decide you're not for them, you've paid that contribution, and like was mooted earlier, you don't get it back. So again, the private pension scheme for the employer, much more attractive because you can put that vesting period in the contract of employment. So you have a conflict really with the AE scheme and probationary periods for every employer out there. And we have to go back to fundamentals, first principles across the board, which is unfortunate news for small and medium-sized businesses who may lack resource. We have to look at the contractual documentation. We have to make a policy available to our employees about information that they can access within the business as to what the differences are between joining the private pension scheme, auto enrolment. You might want to bring in a financial advisor to the canteen at lunchtime to demonstrate as an employer that you've made that information available. It creates some questions with unfair dismissal, discrimination, people who are forced into auto-enrolment without information available in the canteen or where else. Also, as an employer myself, I'm not an expert in financial product, so you would absolutely be advising any employer, particularly small and medium-sized businesses, to engage with a financial advisor and bring that information in. God, you wouldn't want to be giving it yourself and giving the wrong information. And again, logistically, I think with it so close, you know, we need to do it now and understand it now. For me, as a small employer, the idea of having payroll managing 2 schemes is a nightmare. Particularly, you know, I have a bookkeeper 3 days a week. Yeah. To consider that she would have to manage 2 schemes, and you know, it certainly will change the way I feel about, you know, having somebody who's in 2 or 3 days a week, and you know, lots of questions around that. Remembering that it's the gross annual salary. So if you have somebody on €17 an hour, only working for, you know, 3 or 4 months, it's triggered the minute they start. Okay, if the gross salary is going to add up to 20k, it doesn't really matter whether they're there for 10 minutes or 10 months, it's triggered. So lots of questions around that for HR.
And Carrie, in terms of the practicalities of changing contracts of employment, especially for SME businesses, like, what is it? Is it they have to engage a solicitor, or is it?
There are lots of HR companies that offer the service. From an unfair dismissals perspective, the contract of employment is your absolute key document. If you don't have that right, the penalties are wide-reaching and expensive. So we would always, you know, encourage businesses to engage in positive HR, you know, support, advice. Look at that contract of employment. It's a contractual relationship, a bit like a marriage, and I know people will laugh, but it ultimately is a bit like a marriage. And the fundamental provisions within that contract will certainly frame the boundaries of where the relationship goes, particularly things like termination, discrimination, unfair dismissals, so key. So yes, certainly support is necessary.
Great. David, yourself, like, Richie showed there's a lot of information there. This is for a lot of people, it's probably new.
Yeah.
What's your advice to?
Yeah, I suppose the value of advice is critical. That's one kind of maybe criticism we would have of the auto enrolment scheme, where there isn't, I suppose, access to financial advice, and there's loads of kind of studies and surveys out there which do prove that getting regular financial advice does lead to better income, better I suppose outcomes, particularly in retirement. And you see studies where people who get regular advice can have up to 2.5 times the wealth of people that don't when it comes to retirement, and so. Yeah, I think it is important to provide employees with the resources to make better decisions when it comes to their money. And I suppose there was it was an OECD report a couple of years ago which said that in Ireland just over half the amount of adults in Ireland meet the minimum standard of financial literacy. So not all of us, but some of us have a tendency to make bad decisions when it comes to managing our money. And you talk about employee wellness as well, and this kind of sense of anxiety and stress about where our financial future is going, and making the wrong decision. So yeah, just having somebody in your corner basically to look ahead and make sure that you're doing the right things. I think that was kind of, I suppose, reinforced in the last couple of weeks, where you have Donald Trump opening his mouth, markets falling, clients getting in touch, thinking the world's ending. They want to move their pensions into cash, and it's just about reassuring clients that look, that's not the right thing to do, because lo and behold, markets rebound, pretty much erase all of the losses from the tariff announcements, and we move on.
Look, I 100% agree. And the surveys that Dave is talking about were people who do seek advice, and advice doesn't mean every week or it could be once a year, it could be once every a few years, but you are better off because you've put a plan in place, and that plan has got a structure behind it. And at Zurich, the amount of switch requests where people were looking to switch out of their high risk funds into lower risk funds after the Trump tariffs, people are going, I made a great decision, I got out. Unfortunately, they remained out and they never got the bounce back. So having advice and sticking with the plan would have been more beneficial.
It just crystallises the loss, I suppose. Your investment decision should be based on one thing and one thing only. It should be the time frame away from retirement. But I think too many people, without financial advice, they go into low risk funds too early or high risk funds too late, and it just leads to pretty disastrous outcomes in a lot of cases.
Yeah. I'm going to take a sidetrack, actually. I'm going to come to Mairead. And again, it's from a personal perspective, I've got two 19-year-olds who are living at home. And I had moved out of home by the age I was 19, but they're not going to move out of home for another 10 years at the rate it's going. So I saw a survey in Australia that the biggest lender in Australia is the Bank of Mum and Dad, where parents are gifting kids lots and lots of money to help build deposits. And I'm sure lots of people here are thinking this in the same frame of mind. What's the tax implications for that?
The Bank of Mum and Dad.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there are tax implications, firstly. So this is becoming more and more popular. People are getting, well, if they're lucky enough to have Bank of Mum and Dad, they're having to do that because obviously the housing crisis and everything. And it might not just be mum and dad, it could be an uncle or an aunt or something like that. And unfortunately, that is gift and inheritance tax. So it's the same tax. It's 33% of the value you receive. So the key with this is kind of, you can plan ahead. If you know that you are going to be leaving money towards a deposit for your house for your children, or maybe paying for a wedding or something like that. There are a couple of things. So I suppose the most popular thing that I see a good kind of mechanism is the tax-free exemption. So anyone can give anyone $3,000 a year tax-free. So everyone in this room can all give me $3,000 and I won't pay any tax on it. But everyone can do that. So mom and dad can do that. And so that's $6,000 a year you could give your child tax-free. And if you plan ahead, you could do that every year and it will build up slowly. So, sorry, I'll probably take a step back. There's a certain amount you can get tax-free off your mom and dad or your parents. So that's increased actually this year to 400,000. So in your lifetime, you can get 400,000. Anything over that then is going to be taxed. So 400,000 isn't that much when you inherit a house, especially in this climate. So the market value of the house on the date you inherited or gifted it is the value that you'll pay. So if the house is worth 500,000 and you're an only child, then you have to pay 33% tax on the 100,000 over that. So it is quite restrictive. So if on top of that you do have cash that you're leaving or something like that, or you're planning to leave a deposit, if you could even start using the small benefit exemption a bit earlier, or honestly from as early as you can, really, if you're in that position.
So if I was myself and my wife were to try gift our children money, or we're saving for them, if we just put it into our own bank account, that wouldn't work.
No,
We have to
absolutely
actually
not.
transfer it into a bank account for them, or into a savings plan for them, or
Yes, that's really, really important. Documentation is really, really important. I think there was actually a case, was it last year, a revenue audit, where a man was trying to say that he'd got 100 grand off his parents, and he was trying to say it was communion money that they had saved for him. But unfortunately, he couldn't back that up at all. So a document trail is really, really important. You can't give them, I don't know, 100 grand and say, oh, that was 3 grand a year for the last, however many years. You need to have documentation that that gift was given to them in the year. So absolutely a separate bank account, a clear paper trail essentially to back up what you're doing, for sure.
He must have invested the money in a Zurich fund.
Possibly, yeah. But no, it's because again, I think you hear that stories. It's like, oh yeah, I've got 50 grand off the parents, and it's like, how does that work?
Yeah, and sorry that. So the bank of mom and dad, what I see a lot as well is that maybe someone and their partner are getting a loan from, or a bank of mom and dad from one parent, but they mightn't be married. So you wouldn't have that same relationship. Essentially, you're a stranger. So let's say my boyfriend's father gives us money and we're not married. That is, you can only get 20 grand now from a stranger tax free in your lifetime from one person. So it could easily go over that as well. So just to bear that in mind, it's not just your parents that you have to get gift tax, it's aunts, uncles, grandparents, everything. So
very good. And okay, give yourself a break now, Mairead. And Carrie, sorry, last question to yourself, and again, it's personal advice. How important is it to have a will?
Oh, it's the most important thing. And, if you die without a will, the chaos that will follow is horrendous. It is such an easy document in most cases where you have a couple, one leaving everything to the other. It can be done in probably an hour. If somebody gives you full instructions, they must come in and sign the will in the presence of a witness. So it's unfortunately for those people who are remote and don't want to ever come into an office, it's impossible to do it remotely. You can't sign it and scan it back. But once it's done, it remains valid until it is revoked. The only way you can revoke it is by marriage, and that invalidates the will, or by doing a new will. We would advise clients every time their circumstances change, they should look at their will, they should look at tax planning. So if you're starting out at 23 in a profession and, you're on the beer every weekend and you're not really focused, and all of a sudden you're 45 and you've made a lot of money, you should certainly be looking at talking to the likes of Mairead, redoing your will from a tax perspective and making sure your ducks are in a row. It's just so important.
Yeah. And David, you probably see it as well when you're doing financial planning with couples, and probably a question is, do you have a will in place?
Yeah, it's so important. Like, as I said, it can really lead to disastrous outcomes down the line, and it's the last thing somebody wants when they've just lost a loved one, to be going through an absolute, legal nightmare on the back of it. So.
Okay. We're coming to 11 o'clock, so fair play to everyone for managing to stick with us for that length of time. I'm not going to open the question to audience because I don't want to keep people beyond 11 o'clock. So thanks very much for coming.